Hastings. Norman was born in Leicester in the 1920s, worked in Highfields just after Windrush and around the time of the Ugandan Asian exodus of the 1970s. So essentially during some of Leicester's key historical moments. Before he died, Julia Mason began working with him to transfer his notes about his life into a book so that their family history could be passed on down the family and actually shared as well. Well, the first book was out last year, but it didn't stop there. There's now a second book, and Julia joins us now. Julia, morning.
Good morning.
Just a second. Let me just move that microphone without bashing you in the head. Look, just first of all, when you were working with Norman, it was quite late in his life, I think, wasn't it?
It was, yes. He would have been in his 70s.
Was he keen to pass on all this?
Oh, he was very keen. He talked about these stories all the time. He, from talking about his childhood through to his teenage years, and then as a boardman. And because I was a child, teenager at that time, I was listening to these stories firsthand, so they're very familiar to me. There's
a lovely picture here of that first day when he was on the bread delivery. I mean, we're talking horse and carts here.
We are.
You know, his elder Sid that we were hearing about a minute ago was wearing a smock with a brown leather satchel swung round his neck. I mean, this sounds like Victorian days. We were talking about the 40s.
Yes, it would have been the 40s, and the book actually starts with him leaving school. The Moat Boys Intermediate School at the age of 13, and he went on to work in a succession of jobs, one of which was the bread delivery boy. All of his stories have a humour to them. There's one or two stories that are quite sad when he gets into the boardman days, but after the one or two jobs that he had, he was so keen to join the forces because the war was on at that time, but because of his age, the best he could do was join the Merchant Navy, and so he joined as a galley boy. He went down to Sharpness, and he trained on the training ship Vindicatrix, did his basic training. Then he was on ships crossing the Atlantic with Hitler's nasties after them, torpedoing. He was in part of the convoy. So they
were extraordinarily brave people in the Merchant Navy on those convoys, because they were largely, they were escorted, of course they were, but the ships themselves were often old or unprepared or undefended. I mean, it was an incredibly brave thing to do.
The Merchant Navy isn't given the credit that it deserves, because I believe that for the amount of people that were killed, the Merchant Navy had the largest amount. You talk about the convoys. Yes, they were in convoys. They were protected by the RAF and the Royal Navy, but not all of the time. And sometimes they were left crossing the Atlantic without any support whatsoever. And unlike the Royal Navy, if a ship was sunk, as soon as the sailors were in the water, their wages stopped. Whereas in the Royal Navy, their wages continued. So it was very, very difficult. It was very underrated. And he was a galley boy the last couple of years of the war, and then for a few years afterwards, before going back into the working world. He was an engineer for Roneo Vickers, which I believe the offices were on Market Street, but he was the chief engineer across the Midlands, the East Midlands. But then he dipped into, at the age of 39, he decided, as he had a young family, he needed to have better job security. And because of his past life and his interest in people, he decided he'd embark on the career as a boardman, and this is what the book is about.
Let's just halt it there for a second. What is a boardman?
The boardman, before education was out for the working classes, there was no education. Children didn't go to school. They worked in the mills, they worked in the factories, they went down the mines, and they worked on the fields. And life was very, very hard for families at that time. And the children's money, or the few pennies that they brought in, was what kept the family's head above water. But around the late 1800s, I think it was about 1870, Parliament passed an act that all children should receive an education. and that was for the ages between about 5 and 10 years. And by the end of the century, it was up to the age of 12 years. But even though education was out there, children didn't always go to school, and that was with the connivance of the parents, because they knew that money was the difference between sinking or swim. You know, they needed bread on the table. Now, with the schools, they only get paid for the children that are in the classrooms. So if they didn't have the children going to school, they didn't get paid. So a board of governors was created, and we still have the boards of governors today, and they came up with various methods of how to get the children into school. And one of the ideas was the boardsman, and that's where the name boardman come from. It's the boardsman, and the boardman was employed by the schools to go out and bring the children into school, make sure they attended. And in those days, there was no social services, there was no support system for children. So actually getting children into school ensured that they had a meal every day, they were warm, they were dry. The school could keep an eye on them to make sure that they were not being abused. It was a whole system of caring for children, and we underestimate what the schools and what the welfare system does even today in keeping an eye on children and keeping them safe. Being in school, they're safe.
No, look, it was a difficult job being a boardman, though, wasn't it? Because on the one hand, you could chivvy some kids in who were, I don't know, playing truant or having a day off or whatever. But of course, there were in many cases, as you've alluded to, there were reasons why those children weren't going to school, and it was because it was keeping a roof over the family's heads or just food on the table. So, persuading parents that the best place for the children was not out working, but actually in school, was difficult.
It was very difficult, and I understand that even when children did go to school, they were working after school as well. And I don't know the laws and the ins and outs of it, but I would imagine that that's why the laws were brought in, so that children couldn't work until a certain age.
These are extraordinary books. They're incredible historical testaments, I suppose, aren't they? And what's lovely is that we're not. I keep going on this. This is not ancient history.
No, it's not.
This is the really crucial history of Leicester that's well within living memory, for heaven's sake, and passed down from your dad to you. Now we know that something like 1 in 4 people regret not having a conversation with their parents or grandparents before they pass. So, to write 2 huge, they're good, thick, chunky volumes.
400 pages that were longer than that.
Why was it so important to you? Rather than just getting a couple of stories about Dad, why was it so important to get his life history?
Well, he wrote the stories down, as you said in the preamble at the beginning, that he wanted his family to know about what his life was like, and it was a family history. But as I was typing these up, especially after he died, it was the last thing I could do for him.
Is it his voice?
In my head, it's his voice telling the stories. But the first book, I've actually had that made into an Audible version. And that's through the White House Publishing, White House Sound, which is in Leicester. And it's a Leicester actor, Guy Mott, who is the voice of Norman. And so that has been recorded as much as anything else, because I would like people who perhaps don't have the time to read, perhaps they've got sight problems, I'd like them to be included in the audience of how important these stories are, and to enjoy them. And the Leicester Record Office and the Oadby Library, they have considered these books good enough to have in their collection. That makes me very proud.
I think they should be in everybody's collection. Christmas is looming.
Oh, yes, please.
I mean, honestly, if you're interested in local history or social history or just the history of Leicester through the wars and through the 50s and so on, they are terrific. Where do people get hold of them?
Well, they're on Amazon. If you just put in Norman Hastings Through My Eyes or Norman Through My Eyes. But I'm admin on a local Facebook group, the Leicester Born and Raised, and I actually post extracts with the permission of my co-people. So there's Les Pole, there's Craig Bennett and there's Andy Preston, and they're very keen for me to get these stories out. And the response by the public has been amazing.
They're very warm stories, I have to say.
They are very warm stories. There are some sad stories in there, but times were sad at times. But the stories, he started off as a boardman on Dodge City. I won't say where Dodge City was. I know where it is. And the people from Dodge City know where it is. But after a year, he progressed on to the Central District, which is the Highfields. But over his career of 20 years, he moved around Leicester City and he covered the majority of the areas. People can relate to these stories.
Julia, thank you so much for coming in again. It's really, really lovely to see you. And I pass that over. I wish this for one moment, I wish people could see this, because you've held up a big card and you asked to do this right at the beginning. And what does it say on this big piece of paper? I'm not kidding. You've written in big letters.
It says, "Hello to the grandchildren, please." And so that is to, if I can just say the names.
Go on, go for it.
There's Izzy Bradley, there is Ayla Mason, and there is Ella Mason, and there's my little great nephew Jared Hastings, and I've been outed. I've been outed on Radio Leicester.
I love that. Listen, have a lovely Christmas,
Thank
and
you.
I hope that the books fly off the shelves. I'm just sure they will do, because they are really, really good. It's great to see you, Julia.
Thank you very much
Thanks.
indeed.